You are listening to Action Design, your monthly insight into the field of behavioral economics and its applications to the world around us. We bring you leading practitioners from all industries to discuss cutting-edge behavioral research and how to practically apply those concepts to the development of consumer products and public policy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Action Design Radio. I'm your host, Zarak Khan. With me, as always, Erik Johnson. Hi, Erik. How are you?
I am doing well, Zarak. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for asking. And I'm excited to see. I feel like every time we record so since the pandemic, which was when we're recording this, I'm sort of staying put in St. Louis, quarantining in my house here, which is right across from a park. And it seems like every time we record an episode, there is some interesting thing that starts happening at the park bench right across from my window. I think last time there was a giant pig that was...
I remember the pig, yes. That was exciting.
So I'll keep an eye out, and I don't want anyone to worry. I'll keep you updated on anything that happens over there.
Is there nothing cool happening right now?
No, nothing right now.
Okay.
But, this is just...
Expressive.
It's going to happen, yeah. But in the meantime, while we wait for some interesting animals to walk by, I would like to welcome a guest who has joined us before, Kelly Leonard.
One of our favorite previous guests.
That's right.
Very popular episode in the past.
Yeah, it was indeed. Kelly's the Executive Director of Learning and Applied Improvisation at Second City in Chicago. Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be back.
Yeah. We encourage folks to listen to that first episode and learn more about the work that Kelly does and what Second City does. But for those folks who want to just sort of jump right into this one, Kelly, can you give maybe just a quick kind of intro to you and your work?
Sure. I've worked at Second City for 32 years, and the bulk of that was producing and hiring all the talent for the stages. So that was basically from 1992 to 2015. And in 2015, I co-wrote a book called Yes And for HarperCollins Business about how we take our improv principles into the business world. And I ended up stepping down from my producing role and took on this new job in leading some of our educational initiatives. And part of that was also the collaboration, and this is how I met you folks, with the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, the Center for Decision Research. I co-lead the Second Science Project, which looks at behavioral science through the lens of improvisation and vice versa.
It's definitely one of the most interesting careers of a guest that we have on this podcast. And I would say that is a subset of people who all have very interesting kind of careers and career paths. So
eclectic, all right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you were the first person I thought of. This was maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. I attended my first virtual improv show. Mm-hmm. And so this was with two performers that I love, Paul F. Tompkins, Mark Evan Jackson, and the show was awesome. But I could tell these are folks that they know each other really well. They've done this sort of two-man show live before, and even with all this sort of talent, there's a lot of coordination that seems to be happening. And I was like, man, they're doing such a good job of this, and it's clearly very difficult as well. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, man, I really kind of want to talk to Kelly about this because I get a sense that you would have some insight into the work that you're doing. So that's basically what we want to kind of chat with you about today, is sort of your transition from sort of in-person to virtual events, performances, and workshops. So, when you were first kind of thinking about this, how did you approach this strategy?
So I was very lucky in that about a month before we shut down, when everything closed down, I initiated a conversation with the folks at Zoom. We've been talking about exploring this space. And so we had an in right away, and they were terrific because what we basically did was, over the course of 2.5 weeks, we turned the entire business virtual. And that started actually with training center classes, which were not done on Zoom. They have a Canvas set up because they'd already done online writing classes and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But then our corporate workshops, we shifted to Zoom, and then performances after that. And I think the advantage that we had is a couple things. One, we're all improvisers. So this is, the idea of scrambling within a change situation is kind of like how we approach the world anyway. But secondly, we've produced television, and this is television. It is not, and there's differences between that experience. So we just had this other kind of cap we could put on. And we're like, oh, when you produce television, the idea of the voice, the sound is hugely important. And so we brought in music, like even to the workshops. And so I think that was the first thing, because I remember we did a workshop for a large soft drink company. You can guess which one, because there's like two right now. Anyway, so we did this, and they're like, we had a pandemic playlist. We started with "Don't Stand So Close to Me" and like different songs, and the attendees were loving it. And the chat before was like, we should start every meeting this way. And later they told me they had shifted to that and they have different division heads create different playlists before their Zoom meetings. So it was just stuff that we kind of knew instinctively going in, that we were prepared where others might not be. And the most unique thing that I have sort of discovered in this process is when performing, your cast size ideally is 4. So folks who've been to Second City, the cast is always 6. And I know there's some science around this, right, in terms of teams. And so it's interesting, but we especially because people are watching on mobile devices, this cube that we're in, where we can see 4 faces, you put one more or one less, and it is not as strong as an experience.
Do you think that's because of the device that you're watching on, or like if you were watching on a bigger screen or something like that, and you had 6 big boxes, it would be okay, but on a smaller thing, it's 4?
I think if most people are on computers, tablets, or mobile, that it can't really take more. And you know this from your meetings that you go to. Like, I know people have been like, hey, let's do a mixer. You're like, so everyone will grab a cocktail and be at home. And there's like 18 or 19 people. And it's an unmanageable experience. It needs
it's a very difficult conversation to have. Yeah. When there's like 12 people and who's talking now and who's like,
Not everyone understands or appreciates the cue giving that we have to give each other to know when to speak and not to speak. And so this has actually been something that we taught in the very early workshops. We had an exercise that we actually developed at the Second Science Project, and it's called Count to 10. And so what we do in these sessions is say, okay, we have a group of, let's say, 15 people in this workshop. We're going to count to 10 together. The whole thing is everyone's going to contribute a number, but if anyone says the same number at the same time, we have to start over.
Mm-hmm.
And so, amazingly, sometimes we'll get to like 7 and it's like, how did we do that? Because it's nearly impossible, but it then brings up the question, right? Okay, so what can we do? What new norms can we create for ourselves that will allow us to do that exercise effectively? And one, you could raise your hand, you could agree beforehand who's what we can prescribe. And then what's a non-prescriptive norm that we can, play with in this space? And because we're always juggling both. There's the things we can control. So we could control in a small group how people are going to communicate in one order, but that strips a lot of creativity away. So let's think of other things. So my team raises their hand when they want to talk. And then there's always a director of the meeting whose job it is to pick the next person to talk. And others can jump in if they see it and someone doesn't, but it's pretty easy to see in these situations.
Yeah, so let's kind of dig into a couple of these things, because you've covered, I think, or we've touched on sort of the bigger areas that I think we want to do kind of like a dive into. So, what I kind of heard there was that you have some like technology components to this. So you had these conversations with Zoom. You already had folks using Canvas or some other tool for writing. And then you noticed all these things about sort of the process that you needed to change and like the impact to behavior. And of course your business has changed, I'm assuming, because of this as well. So which of those elements do you think is kind of foundational? Obviously they all work together, but I'll note that as you started talking about it, you started with technology. I mean, you sort of started by saying we were lucky because we'd sort of kicked off this conversation with Zoom, which that's sort of where my head would go as well, is like you kind of have to have some medium in place first. But I mean, is that how you think about it as well?
This is a really good question because I don't think I've thought about it in this manner. My first reaction is that unfortunately it's all happening at the same time.
Right.
So, and it is it was very funny when you said you were doing great. I'm like, seriously? because this sucks. I mean, this is horrendous on it. But as I have learned in your particular fields, it's all about framing. And so I think the most important thing actually was starting with the frame of, we're going to do this, we're going to experiment, we're going to fail, and then we're going to figure it out. So this sort of failure forward idea, the idea that you can just flip and be in conversation and assuming your expertise while also assuming your ignorance, these things just go along. And we spend so much time, in our lives thinking things are trying to make things black or white. And they never, ever are. And like the science even tells us this, and yet our brains immediately go to that. And so it was interesting. So that workshop that I mentioned for the soft drink company, they really wanted us to do something around resilience. And that's in our tool bag. But I was talking to my wife, Ann Libra, and I said, hey, do you have anything in this? And she actually gave us an exercise that we did on that very first workshop, and it was called Wish. She created this. And so what we do is we say, okay, everyone think about a wish you have that you could do right now. And so for me, it was swimming in the salt water. Like, I love doing that. And at that point, there was no going out. Like, I was certainly not going to go out, get on an airplane or drive.
The Floridian in me really appreciates this, by the way.
Yep. Okay. So, and then write that down, and then write down the emotion you think you would have if you did that. So I wrote down refreshed. And so, okay, now the third thing I want you to write down is write down something you could do right now to experience that emotion. And I was like, oh, splash water on my face, go for a run, get on the exercise bike. And it was a really telling moment for the people in the workshop who were like, oh, I actually have some control over that emotion, and that emotion doesn't have to take me to salt water. That emotion can take me 5 steps to my bathroom. So the idea of giving people agency within this, time is hugely important. So I think that was the first thing. And this blend of technology. And look, the first shows we did, live shows, where thousands of people were in attendance, and they weren't great, but we knew we just had to get up and make them better. And that's how we made the discovery of like, oh, that first show had 6 people, and we kept cutting into 2s. And then gradually within 3 weeks, we're like, no, it's 4. And then we're able to sort of like get better from there. So I think it is a mastering of sort of individual resilience, change readiness, and then like the hard stuff that you have to do in an increasingly, it's not like things have gotten less complex or less difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We're just piling on at this point.
Yeah, we've done something kind of similar. We actually, I sort of pulled this from kind of the behavioral finance space and like Sarah Newcomb's work, but she talks in her book about the difference between needs and strategies. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times when I'm talking with folks, they're like, oh, we need, like an example here would be like, oh, we need to have like 6 people on stage. It's like, well, is that a need, or is that like the strategy that you use to like achieve this, to meet this need, right? Yeah. Which is putting on a performance.
Yeah.
And so, I think that sounds exactly right to me, which is, first like identifying like what you're actually trying to achieve, mm-hmm. and then sort of like doing a little bit of divergent thinking, right? Of like, well, okay, what are all the other things that I could do that might meet this, mm-hmm. And then testing them out.
I think there's another interesting aspect to all of this, which is, and I fought it because it felt to me, everyone's got to stay on camera to be sort of accountable and there. And I enjoy using your environment. I think is a huge thing. You should use your natural environment. I hate the Zoom backgrounds. It strips me of what I just hate it.
Especially when you have a nice bookshelf to show in the background.
A nice bookshelf, exactly. But it was interesting. I was reminded of like Nick Epley's work around the power of the human voice, and where I don't, when I was doing my live keynotes, I never did slides. I have adapted in this environment to use a few because I think it is helpful. But then Emma Sepala just posted something yesterday on social media about a Michael Krauss study from Yale that showed that hearing is stronger than sight in detecting emotion. And so the idea of like some people need that camera to be off, like they just can't like function this way. And if we can sort of trust everyone in that environment and recognize that actually amping up the hearing is probably more valuable than the visual that we're getting right now.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, you're figuring out like where to emphasize stuff. Because one thing I've noticed, and I've noticed this, and I've heard other people say this too, and that like being on Zoom calls all day is like more exhausting than being in-person meetings.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying like, if we don't need to be on camera, can we just do a phone call? Because that's just easier. And I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but there was some like hypothesizing, and some of it's like, there's a different level of focus when you're on a video call where you feel this pressure to like look directly at the person the whole time. And it's not the same. Whereas like when you're in an in-person interaction, like they know you're there with them. You can kind of gaze off a little bit. And like, you know, there's this different like cues, right? Between in-person and video. And on video, I don't know, there's like a different type of focus that feels a little bit more exhausting. But to your point, like, we get the same, if it's just a conversation, we kind of get the same, and in some ways almost a better conversation by just being on the phone and just hearing audio rather than having to try to pretend we're in person, you know?
Yeah, so I've done, because I'm hosting my podcast, I do one or two every week from here in my bedroom on Zoom. And I just interviewed a guy, Sanford Greenberg, who is blind. And he writes in the book a lot of the power of blindness within communication, that he doesn't care what you look like. He's not looking for any of those kinds of cues. He is simply listening to you. And it was such an effective conversation. There was no talking over each other. And like I interviewed Rob Bell this week. Do you know he was on the Oprah tour. He had a mega church like 10 years ago, and then just didn't enjoy where that was going. And it's become the sort of spiritual talker. We talked over each other constantly. We're excited to have this conversation, but there wasn't the same sort of rhythm. And I've had that a couple times. So I think that's something I'm personally exploring, is getting off of Zoom more or turning off the camera. I know this, when I have a difficult conversation, it's got to be by phone right now.
Why is that?
It is just a more intimate space for us to hear each other. And I look at the study that Krauss did, and I think that's what's going on, which is you're able to hear more of what's not being said when you're simply
you're more attuned to all the details of audio rather than trying to focus on different things. Another part of that too, as you were talking about that, is that phones and computers are sort of inherently distracting too.
Yeah.
And that like we have video, so we're focusing on each other, but at the same time, I'm like really resisting not just opening my browser and seeing if I got an email and stuff. And I just can't help it because it's right there, you know? Yeah. Whereas if I'm talking on the phone, I can kind of go walk around, and like, I've been trying to go for a lot of walks because otherwise it's so easy to be stuck inside like all day. So I'll just go for long walks, and I'll call my friends or whatever. And I find I enjoy those conversations because for me, it's like, it's almost easier to be engaged in the conversation when I'm out walking around or I'm outside, because I can't be distracted by my laptop. I'm not looking at my texts or anything.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, I don't know, it's weird. It's like my visual senses are just sort of already occupied by just walking and being outside, but it's not anything I'm particularly paying attention to. So I'm just more like absorbed in the conversation.
Well, I think also, so we were very good, especially early on. We didn't go out. We didn't see friends. But then as the science was coming in, that outside is a good place to be. And we have a big sort of garden area in the back. We've done a couple dinners where that group can be down the patio. We're up on the deck. We're more than 6 feet apart. We're not sharing, plates or anything. Everyone's got their stuff all laid out. That has been a lifesaver because it was really hard the first time people came over, because it was like, oh, I'm not used to talking to another human being. Like
it's so awkward and like fearful. It's just like, oh yeah.
So now we see someone about once a week, and again, a nice distance way, but it's just like, we've got the space. And then what we all know, because I live in Chicago, it's going to be the same in St. Louis, which is, man, come December, this is going to be bad. Right?
It's the same for us. It's like, we have some outdoor space and some of our friends do, and we just like go to someone's place, keep very spaced out outside. And it's been, I remember those like first times, like, it was a little awkward and almost a little nerve wracking, but like, once I actually started like conversing and doing that, it was like a lifesaver. It felt so much better to have some in-person interaction. And it's the same. Like I'm generally not someone that minds winter that much, but this year I'm like terrified of winter because we're not gonna be able to like, that's why like every day I'm trying to go for walks and bike rides and like meet people outside and do kind of stuff, because like in a few months that might not be an option. So I'm gonna try to enjoy it.
Well, it's also nice to prove the evidence, the science around the fact that human beings need connection. I mean, it's so clear. It is so clear. And we see what happens when we don't. I mean, it is harder to do everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
My boss once said to me when this was going on, he's like, I feel bad for you because people are your oxygen. And I'm like, yeah, it's true.
Very extroverted. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big extrovert. And I've gotten used to the advantages of working from home, you know, in terms of what I'm wearing and, you know, and I'm an early riser. I always have been. So I still get a bunch of work done early, and that gives me more time throughout the day to do what I'm doing. But, you know, I work at a live theater, you know, it's our business is devastated. Now we've been able to make this transition but it's not like we've got a bunch of relief coming, and it's not like this is, you know, we're not going to be in theaters this year. I don't think anyone really believes that. So we have a lot of stuff that we're doing just to keep ourselves, you know, as close to break even as we can. So that's a stressor, and that's hard. And while we're actually doing the work. So it really, back to the beginning of this conversation, it's so important that you let yourself off the hook. I mean, my wife and I have this conversation almost every morning, which is like, how are you? Remember, it's actually going to be okay. Even if it's not going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And I get that. I understand my privilege. I get it. And there's other people not in that situation, but you have to say that to yourself, because the other is cynicism or nihilism. And that ain't going to carry us through.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've definitely been hitting some, I mean, obviously the whole time has been tough, but then it's really off and on with pandemic fatigue. It's like some days it's like, oh, it's nice out, I can go for walks, and like, this isn't that bad. And then like other days I'm like, oh, I can't go to the second city anytime soon. You know, it's like a lot of these things. I mean, I was supposed to be getting married like next week. I mean, that's not happening now. Like, we moved it to next year. Hopefully it'll be fine. But it's like, sometimes things are all right and sometimes they're not. But I think, yeah, that's good. You have to, you at the same time, you forgive yourself. Like, this is a tough time. Like, you don't have to pretend it's not, and recognize that, like, yeah, this sucks in a lot of ways. But at the same time, you do have some control over things, that you can make the most of a crappy situation, you know,
and speak the words
and things
out loud.
you can take advantage, and yeah, exactly. And just like, that's very true. Like, fiance and I've talked about that stuff too. So it's like, sometimes you just like, you almost get so used to it, you don't think about it. So you have to ask and actually get those words out, or else you just sort of fester on it, you know.
Allison Wood Brooks saved my butt ages ago when she told me that before my speaking dates, I should say I'm excited rather than saying I'm nervous. And it literally nudges me directly where I need to be to give my performance energy. And so like, it's that good stressor. Like, that's a good stress. It pushes me to do a good job with this. And I could easily go the other way. And at BJ Fogg, I talked to too about that first thing where you wake up in the morning, you know, I'm happy to be here. Or whatever you say to you, like, but say it out loud and recognize that will help you throughout the day. Yeah,
I use that excited, not nervous, like as well. I'll usually be like listening to like DMX and like excited, not nervous, excited, not nervous, and then like, woohoo, hey, I'm happy to be here. Hey, how's everybody doing?
So this is not just that psychological state. Like, we got a new, our old water filter thing with like, it was old. So we got a new one, and I'd always torn the top off the bottles to put it in, but my new one, you can't tear the top off, but I did it like the first 2 times. And I'm like, and so I literally, when I walked, I'm like, don't tear it off. Don't tear it off. Don't tear it off until it's on the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's the talking to ourselves is maybe a new phenomenon that'll be interesting when we re-enter these public spaces. Right. We're all going to be like freaks.
We're have like such weird habits of never being around people anymore. Yeah.
So related to the moment just a second ago, where it's like, okay, you go first. No, you go first. This is something that I kind of want to dive into. I mean, we talked, a few minutes ago about like cues and how you pick up on cues, and like these are things that, yeah, they do happen in person when you're sort of can see, you know, when you're in the same room as somebody, but they certainly don't happen as often. And you know, I'm interested. You know, if you have insights both from sort of like the workshop and training perspective, as well as the performance. I mean, the performance one is kind of what I was thinking of when I initially reached out to you, is like, man, like, because sometimes the technology fails, right? So it's like, oh, it cuts out for a second. You can't hear what the person said, but you have to kind of keep going. Sometimes you can't tell, like, is it my turn to talk? Is it your turn to talk? Who's going next? So I'm curious as to what insights you have on this.
Yeah, you need a director. Someone should be in charge, and that can rotate. whose job is to either put in the chat, you froze, or say out loud, you froze,
Mm-hmm.
or create rules for the conversation. I mean, this sounds so odious, but honestly, if you're trying to get stuff done, talk about, okay, what do we need to accomplish in this conversation? Can we keep this to like 15 minutes? Don't do the super long. My wife is a college professor, and I swear she is on yet another like all day Zoom meeting where they will cover basically 50% of what they already covered, at the college level, at the department level, at the, it's just,
right.
it's so, but people are afraid to make these changes. And it's funny, corporate America is always like ahead of this stuff because they kind of have to be. So it was very interesting that our clients who had signed up for like, oh, we were going to do these 16 hours of work, like make it 5 and let's go, like spread it out over this. Great. And they just sort of knew that they could pivot. And the bigger sort of institutions are having a lot of trouble with that. And again, for very thoughtful reasons, it's teaching the students and wanting to guarantee that education. But by the same token, you got to shift and you got to try stuff out. Like you're not gonna bake this alone off Zoom. When you get on, you will figure stuff out, and then you need to have the conversation afterwards about how that went, and then make your pivot or make your change, and just experiment. Right now, the gift we've been given is our ability to massively experiment, not just in like business culture. This is happening in society. This is a giant, incredible experiment in changing the course of social justice in a way that we should all have been demanding forever. And now there's this space where hopefully real change can happen.
Yeah. So I mean, you've touched on a couple of really interesting things. I mean, some of them are sort of from kind of like you have to have sort of a good kind of reliable platform that you can use, and the ones that we have are relatively versatile, right? So you can test out different ways of using them. It sounds like you're also encouraging that, as well as it can't be necessarily as like freewheeling as being in person, right? So you need to have a little bit more structure around it and be a little bit more thoughtful about which is honestly like probably true of in-person things as well. Like we should just be more thoughtful about this stuff, as opposed to like, let's all just get in a room for half a day. It's like, okay, you're like wasting a lot of people's time with this. Yeah. So, are there other things that you're thinking of? I'm kind of like shifting us a little bit towards, your sort of like things that Kelly and Second City have learned, over the weeks that you've been doing this, and you're already kind of ahead of the curve in terms of experimentation. So, are there, kind of tips and things that you've learned that folks might use in their communicating kind of virtually this way?
Yeah, so everything takes longer. So you need shorter segments. So if you have a conference or you got to give a presentation, honestly, think about 3 to 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So shorter everything. I don't know anyone who ever went to a play or a movie and said that should be longer. Like that's like everything was already too long. And so I think there's science to back this up, like shorter and more frequent engagements. So everything, compact down to short. Use all the elements you have. So if we're on Zoom, we have video, we've got audio, we've got chat, we potentially have breakout rooms. The more you can break up these conversations with, and this is an interesting thing because I wouldn't have said it before because everything's fighting for your attention. So it would have felt counterintuitive to me to be throwing all this stuff at me, right now. But this is the world we're in right now. And at least what I'm finding more effective is when we use all this stuff. And certainly the coolest thing is when we were doing shows and, as the intro music was playing and people are coming in from all over the world telling us where they're coming in. It's like Montreal and Belgium and Russia and China. It was crazy. And I'm like, oh, this is very powerful now. And then chatting LOL during scenes because, we can't clap and can't laugh. But it was effective. And so I'm like, okay, well, that if it's effective in this medium, it could be effective in a workshop medium. And indeed it has. Or if I'm giving a keynote, it's like, keep it coming in there because I can scroll back. These are your questions, but it's nice to know that you're engaged with me. And it gives me a kind of energy to go back and be like, oh, what I just said hit with you that you then posted this thing. And and again, we talked about using the environment, but I really mean this. So one of the most effective games that we've been doing in shows involves people finding stuff in their apartments or their homes and then bringing that in. Or if you have a dog or you have something else, a baby, whatever, like use it. Like this is a great opportunity for us to see you as human being and start to understand the thing that we should have known before, which is this idea of work-life balance is just, it's a lie. It's like, there is no distinction. We live at work, we live at home. Yeah. So now, okay, now we see you. And for leaders, this is huge. The level of authenticity that we can see. Now it works the other way too in exposing equity and inequity. So I think we also have to be aware when we realize, oh, we've talked a lot about this in terms of what if we have people who can't afford the setup, in terms of being able to do this stuff. And we're like, okay, well, let's make a setup available at our various theater spaces that they could go to. Let's also get mobile kits that we can take to people because at least in our world, we don't want people to suffer simply because they don't have access to the kind of, Wi-Fi or, tech setups that some of us are able to use on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, like controlling the environment. And like, that's sort of like there are big trade-offs here of like a virtual thing where you do have the opportunity to, it can be much more equitable, right? Like way more people can participate you don't have to fly halfway around the world to attend things. But you do have to have some sort of like minimum level of kind of equipment and sort of infrastructure to participate. And then the trade-off for you as sort of the producer of this is that whether it's a theater production or just a meeting, is that you have way less control over the environment. And so way less control over what's going to be distracting people, what's going to be like an emotional high point or whatever for them. But I mean, I like the approach.
There's one other thing that I stole from Heidi Brooks that she does before the first class she has each year at Yale, which is she has everyone write down a piece of paper some pain they've got going right now. And it can be the pain of like paying off student loans. It could be that someone was sick in their family. And then she just reads it off at the beginning of the class. So we've been doing this in our tighter teams of like, let's all share some bullshit that we're dealing with right now. And it's a great way to start a meeting and just humanize everyone and level set everyone and release a kind of burden. I don't think it's incorrect to say we're all living in a collective trauma. Between what's going on with the Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, the sort of political conversation in the country, put all of that together with all the stuff going on in our real lives. I have this like very in control heart condition. But like I've had to go a couple times to hospitals, and that is a stressful situation right now. Yeah. It was really, and I got my results and they were like perfect. Like I got this call in the car and I had a level of elation that I don't think pre-pandemic I would have had, because it's just like, this thing's manageable. I get what's going on, but it's like, oh no, we're all operating much closer to a 10. We're at 8, 9, or 10 in terms of the things that could sort of trigger us. And I have never, and I don't think you two have ever lived through a situation like this. This is new.
Definitely not. Yeah. Very different. Yeah. And I think I really like that point you made about like before a meeting, like, saying those kind of things. Cause it is, I do think in some ways, like I don't know, it's weird. In some ways, I feel like there's less empathy right now because things feel more divisive in some ways. But in a lot of ways, I think we also all kind of understand that I feel like this is the first, like, I'm trying to think how to describe this. It's like we're so much more connected as a world. Like this is one of the first things the entire world is dealing with at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Like this isn't like a war between two countries, which are terrible, but it's, sort of isolated those spaces. Like this is literally a problem the entire world has, and it's affecting each one of us, and it's disrupting the core social parts of our lives. I mean, like, as you were saying, it's like we've learned more about how it's contagious and stuff. And so at this point, I feel like I kind of go do some normal day-to-day stuff relatively safely. Like I can go grab groceries quickly. I don't really worry about that too much. I can go for walks. I can do these kind of things, but I still can't, like, I love going to concerts. Like I can't go to concerts. Like I like going to, I already worked from home before this, but I don't always work at home. Like I go to coffee shops and other places, and like I love those environments. I love sitting in a bar and getting like a cocktail. It's like even all those little things are a piece of like, there's the big things, there's the fear and the health, and also the, also the social justice stuff going on. That's stressful, but then at the same time, there's the sense of loss of all these small things that we're so used to having in our life.
So this is really interesting because we've had these social experiences ripped away from us, which are very affirming to our humanity, but we've amped up our social media, which is the opposite. So we're getting these sort of point, and so, but what's interesting about that is it can work the other way too, because social media isn't just a place for hate. Like I started a thing, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer. My son and I did a thing where we tried to find the best fried chicken in Chicago, and we kept and we would post about it on Facebook, and people were very into it. So we started doing Italian beefs this year, and people are into it. By the way, Johnny's is the best so far. Elmwood Park.
Good to know. I haven't been
really good. And then when I was doing this, a friend of mine invited me to join this Facebook group, which is all Chicagoans, and it's all about Italian beef, hot dog, and hero stands. And it is the most affirming place to go. Like, they'll argue about stuff, but it's like all so good natured and ridiculous. And these people are just obsessed with their Chicago beef, and they're all, there's all Chicago guys, it's they'll have the accent. And so literally Nick and I will be like, have you looked at this? Like, we'll show each other stuff. And like, this is breathing new life into me, this stupid Facebook group. And I think some of the interesting things that people have done in the arts have been the same way, like the dance companies who've been creating sort of Zoom recitals, and you're able to watch this stuff and you're like, oh my God, this is great. So as bad as it is, the other is there. And you just have to, this is why the filters are so important. You have to find, we don't have the seatbelts for this social media experiment, and we need them, I think.
This is sort of a non sequitur, even from Italian beef. It's sort of related to like Erik's point. I've been thinking about this for probably like a month and a half now, and I've kind of been meaning to write like an article about it. But to your point about like how it's sort of like, oh, the whole world's experiencing this at the same time. It's like this is what would happen in like an alien invasion movie.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, we would definitely just all get killed. Like, it's like we don't.
Americans.
Yeah, it's like we don't really come together. We sort of do, but not really.
New Zealand would be the superpower.
Well, yeah. The other thing that's sort of funny about it is like everyone sort of, I've seen people doing this in their like change in behavior over the past few months with relation to a virus, which is obviously not human. It does not, and just does not have social like anything, right? So it's not like following any kind of social cue, where it's like, oh, like, well, I've been so good for so long that if I have a lapse in my like good behavior, it's sort of it's kind of forgiven because it's and obviously like, yeah, sure, you're minimizing risk the more that you're compliant, but it's not like there's like a sort of human on the other side. It's like, okay, yeah, you know what? I know we're on opposite sides of the battlefield, but it's Christmas, so we're both going to take the day off. It's like, no, that's not what happens here. So I feel like this is like an alien invasion kind of like scenario.
Yeah, we're not doing well.
Waiting for
we're not doing well.
No. We're and in particular too, early on, there appeared to be a really, at least a clear division of like, oh, like at a federal level, this is terrible. Oh, wait a second, at a gubernatorial level, this seems pretty good. And certainly I was really happy with Lori Lightfoot, our mayor, at the beginning. I'm not anymore. And it's like, and it's like, and her refusal to look at the data around why it would be good to have the beaches and parks opened. It's like, I'm baffled by this, because it's like, there's actually research out there. And remember when we saw all the kids at the beach in Florida, and we're like, well, that's going to be a nightmare. And it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And the protests haven't been.
Yeah, and that leads to like, that's been frustrating me as well. And like, I'm not even supposed to go to the beach that often, but it's just like, so the principle of it, and also just to your point too, like we only have good weather for so long, and like it's very likely that we're going to be stuck inside with not a whole lot to do come like November or so.
Yes. Yep.
So like, I also look at it, at some point there is a little bit of a human trade-off where like, okay, like there might be some big groups that gather on the beach, and maybe that will cause a small amount of spread or something. But also if 99% of the other people on the beach get a very much needed sun and release and outdoor space that keeps them sane, Like
Yep.
in some sense, that's like a trade-off that seems worth it to me. We at this point, it's so long in and we are all struggling. It's like if we can do things that have a very small amount of risk but give us a lot more enhancement and well-being, that's sort of a trade-off that I think we can make. I guess especially I feel like the clock is ticking on the weather, and I feel the pressure every day. I'm like, I got to be outside.
It's interesting too. So I live in Ravenswood Manor, so I'm right between Lincoln Square and Albany Park, and I swear to God, Albany Park on Kedzie, masked up like the like good, and I go to Lincoln Square, and it is like 20% of the people have masks. It's like, and I don't know what the different demographics. I mean, I have a general idea there what's going on. I mean, you've got people who are having to go to work versus a lot of people I'm looking at Lincoln Square who don't. But
work from home. Yeah.
I think that this, as the social experiment side of this, yes, we're kind of failing it at every level. But there are pockets where we're not, and we just like that. We got to figure out a way to like have the pockets who are correctly behaving lead. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, I don't think we have an answer for it right now.
Let's all brainstorm. We'll meet again in 3 weeks, and we'll see if we can come up.
Yeah, the reveal, the giant reveal of this podcast is that we don't know, and we can't seem to be able to figure it out. Sorry.
Spoiler. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I think we did get some pretty good insights on, on meeting and on using some of the tools that we have and some of the great stuff that you've been doing. So thanks for sharing those. And in the meantime, I know that this is kind of a critical time for your organization and the work that you're doing, and you're kind of really at the forefront of testing out a lot of these things too. So how can people kind of follow you, support, go to shows, that sort of thing? Like, what's the best way?
So go to secondcity.com or secondcityworks.com. You'll see all the information for both class. The nice thing is, for classes, we started doing things like, we call them escapes. We have drop-ins. So we've been able to pick up way more people who just want to come in and try this out for $50 or whatever. And so that's been a great, sort of like gateway for future students who want to complete the whole program. And then we have a rich amount of work that we're doing, and we're able to create content now. We've got crews and other things that can work safely going, and we do have animators, and there's all that work that can be done. And then follow me on Twitter, KL Second City.
Awesome. I know you're not really supposed to ask a question like after you do like the plug thing. I just sort of, but as you were describing that, I was like, I wondered, are some people more receptive to starting off, like trying out something now because it seems less risky to do it over Zoom than being in person?
100,000%.
Yeah, right.
What we're finding is that's that accessibility issue for people. So it doesn't matter where they are. The price points are better. There's lots of different ways, and if they don't like it, they can actually just leave.
Yeah, right.
But they're not. They're staying, and we're doing like a really rich amount of like a lot of summer camps for the kids, and that's I think a really for the parents, because we're giving them play. It's not just like they're watching a talking head. They can get split up into groups, and they're making up stuff, and we're doing shows. So yeah, I've been happy that we've been able to bring so many more people into our world, because I also think that this doesn't end. I think when the theaters open, what we've recognized is that we have a digital business that we can keep going. So that's actually a great opportunity once we figure out the other side of it.
Absolutely.
In a way, you've sort of like, you've built you're less reliant on one avenue now, which, this still sucks right now, but in the long term will be a good thing.
Yeah. Something else comes along, we have to shut down. Oh, we know how to do that now.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, Kelly, thank you very much for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
It was great to have you on again.
All right, guys.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
I very much look forward to the first time I can be back in the theater. So
absolutely.
Whenever that is.
Too. Me.
We'll be lined back up.
All right.
Until then.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. That concludes this edition of Action Design Radio, hosted by Erik Johnson and Zarak Khan. All podcast episodes are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and many other platforms where you might typically get your pod on. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Special thanks to Morgan Bortz for design. And as always, we would like to recognize Steve Wendell, founder of the Action Design Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to spreading awareness about behavioral economics, psychology, and all things behavioral science in order to help you improve your life, your career, and your understanding of the world around us and the people in it. I am your producer and audio engineer, Zach Simon. For more cutting-edge behavioral science content, visit action-design.org. Once again, that's action-design.org. There, you can sign up for our newsletter and find an in-person event happening near you. We have chapters in over a dozen cities in the United States and Canada. Also, on our website, you can find additional notes and links regarding the topics discussed in today's episode. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.